get y'all out of here on time tonight. All right, verses 11 through 22. We're just about through with chapter 2, so we're almost on schedule. So eventually, again, those first 40 years, Moses lives in the palace, but eventually he decides he wants to go be around his own people. And so remember, he's 40 years old at this point. And so we want to notice in Acts 7 and 23, and when he was full 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. So that's how we don't have to guess about that. We know that for sure. So this begins stage 2. As I told you, you can divide his life really into 3 stages. So this begins stage 2. And so while he's walking among his people, which remember have been enslaved, and so the Egyptians are, Pharaoh wants them to be harsh so he can weed out some and that sort of thing. And so Moses notices, he sees an Egyptian beating one of the Israelites, so giving him a severe beating. And so Moses, when he notices this, he looks around. Like, anybody around here? He kind of looks around, and then he kills the Egyptian for beating the fellow Hebrew. And you see in verse 12 it says, and he looked this way and that way. When he saw there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. So he wasn't doing this openly. He's hoping he could get away with killing this guy. So he looked around and he didn't see anybody. But was that really the case? No, he didn't look good enough. Okay, he didn't look good enough. But apparently, Moses had somehow learned, but apparently God had told him, that he was supposed to deliver the Israelites. So we want to notice in Acts 7, we just looked at verse 23, the next couple of verses. We see this where it says, and seeing one of them suffer wrong, he defended him and avenged him that was oppressed, and smote the Egyptian. Okay, but notice verse 25. For he supposed his brethren would have understood how that God by his hand would deliver them, but they understood not. Okay, so that's interesting. So he supposed, well, they would know that I'm the one that's going to deliver you. Well, how would Moses know that? So God had apparently communicated it to him already. At some point, I'm going to use you to deliver the Israelites. Okay, I don't think he gave Moses the details at this point, but apparently Moses was under that impression, I'm the guy that's going to lead the people. So he felt like, well, I've got a right to kill this Egyptian. And these guys ought to realize that, I'm doing it for them and I'm supposed to lead them. But what was his mistake here? Do what? Yeah, somebody did see him. But so first of all, he murdered somebody. God didn't tell him to do that, right? And the other thing is, yeah, God had said at some point I'm going to use you, but this was not the way to do it. Again, God did not command him to do that. He took it upon himself, and this wasn't the time either. So God would have indicated at some point, but when God's ready to use Moses, will he make sure that Moses understands now's the time? When he's ready to use, right. And he hadn't done that yet. So Moses kind of took it upon himself to do it. And he did the wrong thing at the wrong time. But it's interesting that he had some indication that he was eventually supposed to lead the people. So then we see, then the next day, two of the Israelites are fighting amongst themselves. And so Moses comes in to be peacemaker, and he wants to break up this fight. And one of the two of them asked Moses a really interesting question, which probably sent chills down his spine What did he ask him? You going to kill me too? Moses, what are you talking about? And Moses now suddenly realized, uh-oh, there must have been a witness yesterday. Somebody saw it, and if it wasn't these guys, somebody else saw it, and they've been talking about it. So what does that mean? The word is spreading. That's dangerous for him. That's not, when you kill somebody, I'm not advocating that. Please don't do that. But the last thing you want to do is for everybody in town to start talking about it. Well, you know, Reggie, he murdered that guy. Yeah, you don't want that to get out. You know, so Moses knows he's in trouble. Wow, somebody saw me and they're starting to tell people, and man, that's not bad, or that's not good. And so then we see that it gets all the way back to Pharaoh, that he hears that Moses has murdered one of his Egyptian soldiers, guards. So what does Pharaoh want to do? He wants to kill him. Yeah, he wants to kill Moses for that. As you could imagine, that would be a death penalty offense. So he wants to execute Moses. So Moses realizes now is a good time to leave this place. And so he goes to a place to the southwest called Midian. And this is where he's going to be for the next 40 years, the next stage of his life. And so there, when he goes there, he helps the daughters of the priest of Midian, a guy by the name of Reuel. And so Reuel, something we do want to point out here, there's some other places where we'll notice that Reuel is also called Jethro. Not Jethro Bodine of the Beverly Hillbillies, but he is, because that's the only other Jethro I've heard of, right? But he's also called Jethro. Okay? Now, some people like to latch onto that and say, well, that's aha, see, there's a contradiction in the Bible. Is his name, you know, what's his name? Is his name Jethro, or is it Reuel, or which one is it? That's a contradiction. Well, is it a contradiction? No, not at all. Okay? Most people have more than one name, right? A lot of people have nicknames. Okay? And so, you know, my father-in-law was William Wilkinson, but everybody called him Bill. Nowhere would you find that on his birth certificate, but was he one and the same person? Sure. A lot of people named Robert, people will call them Bobby. Same person. Or you've got, everybody has, or most everybody has a first name and a middle name. So my name is Mark Lee Stephenson. So if you called me Mark, would that be factual? That'd be true, yeah. What if you called me Lee? Same guy. What if you called me Stephenson? Same guy, right? There's 3 different names that I could go by. And I've heard a lot worse names being a school teacher. So I've been called a lot of things over the years, right? But yeah, a lot of people have more than one. So that's not a contradiction. It's just he's Reuel, but he's also Jethro. And one of those might have been a title of some kind. But anyways, it's no contradiction. So Moses winds up marrying one of his daughters, and they had a son. And so, as we said, Moses is going to spend about 40 years being a shepherd, working for his father-in-law, because he's not yet ready to deliver God's people. And God knew when the time would be right. It wasn't right when he killed the Egyptians. God wasn't ready for him to do this, probably because God knew Moses wasn't ready. Moses still had to grow, even though he's 40 years old, but he still had to grow and mature. So God, you know, knew when Moses would be ready. So there's a lesson for us here. We want things, and I'm as guilty as anybody, we want things to happen quickly when we want it to happen. But if we're faithful Christians and we trust in God, what do we need to do? God, I want you to do it when I'm ready. Is that the attitude I should have? I say let God work things out in his own time. And that might take years. Sometimes, you know, we pray to God. He's going to answer the prayer one way or the other. Number one, he may not answer it the way we want. But that's okay because I trust him, and so he's smarter than me. So I might think I know what I need, but he really knows. Number two, he might answer it the way I've asked, but it might be 15 years from now. You know, God, I didn't want you to take that much time. Well, it's not up to me. It's up to him. I just need to be patient, and Moses needed to be patient. God will use him when he's ready to use him, when he knows that Moses is ready to do this. Okay, so then the end of the chapter, It says that eventually the Pharaoh, of course, who wanted to kill Moses, he dies. And the Hebrews hope that, okay, now we got a new Pharaoh, maybe things will get better in our lives. Well, did they? Nope, they're not going to get any better. And so they begin to cry out more to God. Apparently this other Pharaoh, he was even worse. And they cry out more to God. And so now God is going to begin to put in motion his plan to liberate the Hebrews from the Egyptians. And so another kind of lesson there, because none of us likes when bad things happen in our life, whether it's disease or the loss of a loved one, whatever it is. None of us likes those things. They're not enjoyable. But the trials and tribulations that God allows to come our way, what do they do for us? I mean, why would God let that happen? I'm trying to serve God. Why doesn't God just make everything in my life perfect? Why would he let bad things happen to me? Makes us stronger. It builds us in the faith, right? So what we see here with them is even the worst oppression, what did it do? It brought them closer to God. It's probably what God wanted all along, right? So some people need that to quit trusting in themselves and quit depending on themselves and say, you know what, I've got to turn it over to the Lord. This is just too much for me to handle. So a lot of times it brings us closer to God. It makes us stronger in our faith. And of course, if we can figure that out, obviously he knows that. Right? And so we just have to trust in him. All right, let's go to chapter 3. Verses 1 through 6. So now we skip ahead, and chapter 3 picks up at the end of the second stage of Moses' life. So now he would be how old? 80. Right? So we left off, he's 40. Now we skip ahead, and he's 80. And we know, like I said, he was a shepherd during that time for Jethro. And so he had spent 40 years of his life there in Midian being a shepherd after he had fled from Egypt. And how do we know this for sure? Well, again, skip ahead a little bit. We look at Exodus 7 and verse 7. And Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron 83 years old when they spake unto Pharaoh. Well, what's 80? What's a score? 20. Yeah. Gettysburg Address, right? Abraham Lincoln, 80, and right? A score is 20 years. 80, if my math is correct, 4 times 20 is 80. Right? So that's how we know he's 80 years old. Aaron is 83 years old when God's going to send them to talk to Pharaoh. And then notice in Acts 7 and 30, it said, and when 40 years were expired, there appeared unto him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai an angel of the Lord in a flame of fire in a bush. So again, we see that 40 years has passed when this is going to happen. So Moses, he's a shepherd for his father-in-law. He's tending the flock on Mount Horeb. So then he notices something that you might describe as being unusual. There's a bush on fire. Now, you might see that from time to time. What was strange about this one? It's not being consumed. You set a bush on fire, it's going to burn up. This one wasn't. It was just continually burning. So that's not something you see every day. So Moses recognized that this has got to be miraculous. This is not something that is normal. And so then God speaks to him. And how does Moses answer God when he speaks to him? How does he answer him? Yeah, here am I. Good way for us to answer God. You know, when God needs us to do something, here am I, Lord, send me. We're tempted to say, here am I, Lord, but send somebody else. Right? We need to be willing to serve God. So Moses, here am I. Yes, it's me. I'm here. So God tells Moses to do something. What does he tell him to do? Take your shoes off. Why? You are standing on holy ground. Why was it holy? Because God, with the presence of God, was there. Right. And we need to have that same kind of reverence for God And so many people today do not. Even people that call themselves Christians, they don't have the proper respect that we should have for God. Everybody wants to compromise on His Word. We want to go along with the world. Well, the world said this is okay. God doesn't like it, but maybe God will overlook it. It'll be okay. Those kind of things. We just don't reverence God like we should. We know that the Bible is mocked by people. Christians are mocked and ridiculed. So those people certainly have no respect. God's name is taken in vain. That used to be rather shocking, and now it's, we know the meme, the OMG. We all know what that stands for. And that now it's just that's something people use all the time. Well, that's taking God's name in vain. We all know what it represents. Janice and I were just in San Diego, and that's why I wasn't here last week. We were out there, and we were eating dinner right there by the bay, and there were some kids swimming in the bay, probably 8, 10 years old. And one little girl in particular, she kept saying, "Oh my," she just kept saying it. Every time somebody would splash her, it's like, "Can you take the Lord's name in vain some more? I mean, you haven't done it enough." I thought, where are your parents? Have they not? But she probably heard it from them, because people just don't think anything about it. It's what people say. But we are not to take God lightly, and so many people do. So Moses has the proper reverence and respect for God. And so how does God identify Himself to Moses? I'm the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. I am the God, the one true God. Okay? So that gives us a connection back to the patriarchs. And so, again, we see Moses, he turns away in fear because he's got that reverence. He knows he's in the presence of the Creator of all things. Okay? Look at Psalm 89 and verse 7. If we look at that, we're commanded to do that all throughout the Bible. God is greatly to be feared in the assembly of the saints, and to be had in reverence of all them that are about Him. Okay? So have you ever been, I know I have, you ever been in a worship service where people are talking, and even during the Lord's Supper, they're whispering, they're passing notes and stuff like that. And does that go along with this verse? God is to be greatly feared in the assembly, to be had in reverence. Just so many people, they want to play at church, but they don't take it seriously. That's not going to get us anywhere if we don't do that. Okay, now something else interesting I wanted to point out here. So God says, I'm the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. At this point, when He's talking to Moses, where are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? They're all dead. But yet God said, I'm their God. Well, they're dead. Does that tell us anything? Well, Matthew 22 and 32, notice where Jesus said, I'm the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. So what does that tell us? We're eternal. We all have an eternal spirit, right? We're made in the image of God. Well, God doesn't look like us. God doesn't have a physical form. So how are we made in His image? Because we have an eternal spirit. God is an eternal spirit, and we have that too, right? That's why He's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Their physical bodies are dead, but at this moment when God's talking to Moses, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are all still alive, just like they are today. They're still alive today. Their physical bodies are dead, but their spirit is still alive. So yet more evidence, because some people will tell us, well, when you die, that's it. We don't live on. We don't have an eternal spirit. Well, that contradicts what the Bible says. Now, verses 7 through 10. So God tells Moses, look, I hear the cry of the Israelites. I hear it. And the time has come, I'm going to deliver them. Okay, which He intended to do all along, but again, in His time. Now it says kind of something interesting, but again, we want to notice what this means. Look in verse 8 there. I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians. Does that mean that God is going to physically descend from heaven, maybe take on a human form like Jesus will later? Is that what God's going to do here? Yeah, he's going to send Moses, right? So this is figurative language. God is just saying, the time is now. I'm going to act to do something about this. And he's going to send Moses to do it. So it doesn't mean he's going to take physical form and come down. Okay? God puts it in human terms so Moses can understand it. And he knows what he's talking about. So God is saying, I'm going to deliver them from bondage, and I'm going to take them to the promised land, the land of Canaan that I promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's going to fulfill that promise. Now, notice how God describes here the land of Canaan. He says it's flowing with milk and honey. So they got plenty of resources, right? We're told, he kind of lists all the different people that already live there. Is that a problem? It would be normally. Right? Well, how are we going to take that land, God, if those guys are already living there? They're probably not just want to give it up. Just like somebody came to your house today, said, hey, you Perrys, move out. I'm taking over your house. You're going to go, okay, sure, fine. You know, you're going to fight to keep your property. You've paid for it. You put your blood, sweat, and tears into it. Well, they're not just going to give it up. But yet God is telling you, you're going to have it because I'm going to allow you to conquer all these people. So it's not going to be a problem. But God is telling them all these people already live there, but you don't need to worry about that because we're going to take it. And so God is going to use Moses to try to convince Pharaoh to release them from their bondage. All right, verses 11 through 18. Now here we start to see when God tells Moses, I'm going to use you to deliver my people, you're going to go talk to Pharaoh and convince him to let my people go. Now when he first sees the burning bush, here am I, Now his tune changes a little bit. Who, me? Lord, surely you're mistaken. You don't mean me. Well, I can't. Moses starts to tell him all the reasons why he can't do this. So he's going to come up with 4 different excuses as to why he's not the guy for the job. Now, the fundamental flaw in Moses' logic, right off the bat before we get into the excuses, the fundamental flaw is what? Well, I'm not the guy for this job. What is totally wrong with that? I mean, who's asking you to do it? God is. So if I'm really not the guy for the job, what does that imply about God? God's wrong, right? You picked the wrong dude. You're really telling God that he's right. If God says, you're my man, you're going to do it, and you say, oh, no, it can't be me, it's got to be somebody else, you're telling God that he's wrong. So Moses should have realized, well, God can't be wrong, so if he picked me, I guess I must be the guy. But he's going to try to weasel his way out of it if he can. So, objection number 1, Moses says, who am I? I'm a nobody. Who am I that I could do this? Okay, now remember, 40 years before, when Moses was 40 years old, he thought he was the guy then. That's why he thought he could kill the Egyptian. And, well, God's going to use me to, he was full of confidence and arrogance at that point. Now at 80 years old, he decides he's not the guy. Okay, so what has changed? Well, Moses has grown, he's matured. Now he's not so arrogant that he was before. Now he's got a lot more humility because he probably really did believe, oh, surely there's got to be somebody better than me. Because honestly, if God told me to do something like that, that would have probably been my first, I would have thought, surely there's got to be somebody better than me to do what God wants to get done. I mean, we would have a tendency, unless we really are just well, of course God would pick me. Who else would he pick? Unless we're just that arrogant. So you can kind of see this from Moses. So he probably really was, it can't be me, surely. There's got to be somebody out there that's better. So it's interesting to see the change, and which hopefully you and I change in 40 years too. We wise up a little bit. But now at 80, he's full of doubt. But see, he was full of confidence back then, and God knew he wasn't ready. Now he's full of doubt, and God knows he's ready. God said, yeah, I'm talking to you. You're going to do this, and I wouldn't pick you if I knew you couldn't do it, so you're going to do it. Okay? So we do want to have confidence that I can do whatever God wants me to do, but at the same time be humble about it. Right? So a very well-known verse, Philippians 4:13, tells us what? I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. So you do want to have the confidence that whatever God needs me to do, I can do it. But at the same time, be humble about it. So God counters that objection by telling Moses, if you look at, I think it's verse 12, and he said, certainly I will be with thee. Right? Well, who am I? Surely I can't do this. God says, I'm going to be with you. I'm not sending you in there by yourself. I will be, if you do what I ask you to do, I'll be with you. What did Jesus say? I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. I'll be with you. God will only turn his back on me if I turn my back on him. Okay? But as long as I'm faithfully trying to serve him, I know that the Lord is with me. And he's telling Moses, I'll be with you. You'll get through this. I'm going to strengthen you. I'm going to help you do this. Okay? Well, objection number 2. So Moses goes, well, he should have said, oh, okay. But he doesn't. So, well, yeah, but okay, but what am I supposed to do? You want me to do? What am I supposed to tell him? Who sent me? I don't even know what to tell him. Who sent me? Well, notice God's answer. God's answer demonstrates that he's eternal. God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, thus thou shalt say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me unto you. That's what you say. Okay? If we look at Revelation 1 and verse 8, I am Alpha and Omega, which what are those? First and last letters of the Greek alphabet, right? I'm Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the ending, saith the Lord, which is and which was and which is to come, the Almighty. Okay? In John 8:58, Jesus used the same terminology. Jesus said unto them, verily, verily, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am. He used that same term, I am. Okay? So telling us again, God is eternal. He's always been here. He'll always be here. Okay? So God tells Moses, you tell them that I am sent you, and they'll believe you. Okay? If you tell them that, they'll believe you. And so God told Moses, he said, I want you to take the elders, some of the tribal leaders, and ask Pharaoh, and he's going to kind of start small. So I want you to ask Pharaoh to let them go into the wilderness to worship God. So he's not asking, right, let us all leave permanently. Just ask him, you want to go out into the wilderness to make sacrifices unto God. That's what you're going to ask him. And see, the thing was that previous pharaohs, the record shows, they had allowed them to do that. Not just the Israelites, but other people too, that they had enslaved and captured. They would allow them to go out and make sacrifices or offerings to their God. So this was not really an unreasonable request. So we're going to just start out small. You're going to ask Pharaoh to do that. Give Pharaoh a chance to be reasonable. Okay? Verses 19 through 22, though, we see, God knew Pharaoh's heart. And God knows what's in all of our hearts too, right? But God wants to give us chances to do the right thing. And so he's going to give Pharaoh a chance to make the right choice. But he knew Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he said, I'm going to smite Egypt because of that. Because Pharaoh is not going to do what he needs to do. And so what's God referring to there? I'm going to smite Egypt. What? The 10 plagues, right? That's exactly what he's talking about. Moses probably doesn't know that yet, but we know it, past tense, right? So that's what he's talking about. Well, some of the Egyptian people apparently were sympathetic to the enslaved Israelites. And it's kind of interesting there at the end of the chapter. It says, I'll give this people favor inside of the Egyptians, that when you go, you're not going to go empty-handed. They're going to give you all kinds of stuff, all kinds of treasure. Part of that was probably some of them felt sorry for them, but then probably another aspect of it was, of course, that was after the 10th plague. So why do you think they would want to give them stuff to leave? Please go. You know, here's $1,000. Just get out. Here's my car keys. Just take them and go. Right? You've caused me so much trouble. I'm willing to give up a bunch of stuff just to get you out of here. That probably had something to do with it as well. And we'll notice that later on when they do leave. That's exactly what's going to happen. They're going to be weighted down with treasure that the Egyptians are going to give them just so they'll leave. Okay? So again, a little bit of prophecy there. All right, chapter 4. So here we start out with, so far, how many objections has Moses given? 2. We got 2 more. Okay? So we get here, we find objection number 3. So first of all, surely it's not me. I can't be the guy. And what am I supposed to say? I don't know what to tell them. Objection number 3. If I tell them that the true God appeared before me, they're not going to believe that. No matter what I say, they're not going to believe that I actually was in your presence. And again, Moses is wrong here because God already told him that they would believe him. Is God wrong? No. So God's already told me that they'll believe me, so I should quit questioning that. Okay, well, if the Lord says they'll believe me, they'll believe me. But he's trying to find a way out of it. Well, I can't believe they'd ever believe me that actually happened. And so, again, another lesson for us, God is never going to ask you and me to do anything that's impossible, any more than he's going to ask Moses to do something that's not possible. Moses convinced himself, there's no way they're going to listen to me. God said, I wouldn't send you if there was no way they're going to listen. Okay? Again, talking about the Israelites here, not the Egyptians, but he's saying, my fellow Israelites aren't going to believe me. Yes, they will. I told you they would, and they will. Okay? So God answers this objection by giving Moses some miraculous abilities. He says, I'm going to give you the ability to show them that you are from God. You're coming from me. So first of all, Moses has a rod. He tells him, throw that down on the ground. He does. What happens? Turns into a serpent or a snake. What does Moses do? Same thing I'd do. Run. Only good snake is a dead snake as far as I'm concerned, right? And so this was probably a venomous snake. Moses was obviously terrified of it, and he runs away from it. And then God tells him, I want you to pick that thing up. Are you sure about that? I don't want to touch that thing. God says, pick it up. But interestingly, he tells Moses, I want you to pick it up by the tail. Yeah, that's the worst place to pick up a snake. Just for your information today, if you see one in your house tomorrow, oh, well, Moses picked it up by the tail. I think I'll do the same thing. Bad idea. Okay, you pick up a snake by the tail, it's easy for him to turn around and bite you. If you were going to pick up a snake, which I don't recommend, I'm going to run in the other direction. But if you were going to pick it up, where do you pick it up from? The neck, back of the neck, right behind the head. So then he can't reach around and bite you. I'm still not picking the thing up, but anyway. But so he tells Moses, pick it up by the tail, which was incredibly dangerous. But again, God is showing him, I'm with you. Nothing's going to happen to you. So he picks it up by the tail, and again, turns back into the rod. So you would think Moses is going, well, that's a neat trick. Yeah, they ought to believe me with that. But Moses, still not sure about this, so God says, well, I'll give you something else. So he said, put your hand in your cloak and pull your hand back out. When he pulls his hand back out, it's covered with leprosy. And he says, all right, now put your hand back in there. He puts it back in there, comes out, it's clean. Now, what would they have thought about leprosy? Yeah, it was the most dreaded disease at the time, right? We've learned it's not as contagious as they thought it was back then, but it was contagious, and people really, because it's a nasty disease to have, and so like, yeah, you're going to show people you can have the worst disease possible and then immediately cleanse yourself of it, or God's going to cleanse them of it. Okay? So that should be pretty impressive to show people. And then if that's not all good enough, then God says, all right, you can take river out of the Nile, water out of the Nile River, pour it on the ground, it'll do what? It'll turn into blood. Right there on the spot, you can turn it into blood. Okay, now that's interesting, and we might think, well, I get the serpent thing, that's pretty impressive, and the leprosy thing, but turning the water into blood, what's... Maybe a little symbolism there. When we're baptized into water, it is symbolically what? It's the blood of Christ, right? So you got that. But something else here in particular, see, the Egyptians thought the Nile River itself was a god. And so if you could take part of that god and bloody it up, that is showing that Moses' God had power over your God, the Nile River. So that's why that's significant as well. It's like that's going to make an impression on some people. So God has power over the false Egyptian gods, of which there were a multitude. And they worship just about everything in nature. We're going to see that with the plagues. So surely by now Moses is convinced. Or not. Objection number 4. So after, he sees all this, then Moses tells God that he's not a good speaker. Well, you want me to go talk to Pharaoh, but I'm not really a good speaker. I'm slow of tongue, So some people have thought, well, he might have had some kind of speech impediment or something, but I'm not really a good speaker, right? And so if you want me to go do this, shouldn't you get somebody that's, a great orator? Somebody can really convince people. Okay? Because let's see, I think it's in verse 10. I'm not eloquent, neither heretofore, nor since thou hast spoken unto thy servant. I'm slow of speech and of slow tongue. And then God comes, well, who's made the mouth? Who made all this? I know how you speak. I made it. In verse 14, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. Okay, God's had enough. He's been pretty patient with Moses up to this point. He's just kind of answered every objection. Now he really gets mad at Moses. All right, he says, look, I made mouths, I made tongues. Do you not think I'm going to tell you what to say? I told you I'd be with you. You can do this. But God tells him, said, look, I'm going to send your brother Aaron. You're going to tell Aaron what I said, and Aaron he can speak for you. Because Aaron he doesn't have your speech problem. So he said, I'm going to be with you guys, and we're going to get this done. Okay? Because again, the bottom line is, God wouldn't pick Moses for the job if Moses couldn't do the job. So God says, well, Aaron's coming to meet you, and God, in verse 27, God had told Aaron to go to Moses and said, Aaron's going to help you with Pharaoh. All right, verses 18 through 23. So Moses goes to Jethro, his father-in-law. He gets permission. Can I go back? Can I leave here, go to Egypt? So he does. And God tells him again that, all the Pharaoh, the people that wanted to execute you for the murder 40 years ago, well, they're all dead. So it is safe for you to go back. I'm not going to let anybody hurt you. All right. So did God know that Pharaoh would resist? I mean, sure he did, right. Okay. But see, God will use that to his advantage too, because this gives God the opportunity to demonstrate his power over Pharaoh. He needs to have the plagues to show people who the true God is. So that's all part of it as well. Okay, so God tells Moses that here, I want you to tell Pharaoh that I consider Israel like my first son or my children. And he's like, since Israel is my first son, if you will not release them, you tell Pharaoh, if he will not release you, then I will kill his first son. Now, what's that a prophecy of? The 10th plague, right, where he will kill Pharaoh's firstborn son and all the firstborn sons of the Egyptians. So that's a prophecy for that. And after that, finally, that's when Pharaoh is going to let him go. So verses 24 through 26. Again, God has lost his patience with Moses. He's angry with him about this, and we see that he punished him in some way. We're not told what. Some kind of disease, some kind of affliction. And why is that? Well, in Genesis 17, God had commanded Abraham to circumcise all the male Hebrew children. But Moses had not done that for some reason, even though he knew he had to have known he was supposed to do that, but he hadn't done it. So finally now at this point, who does it? His wife. She has to do it. She's not too happy about that. And then God allows Moses, once that was done, and God allows Moses to recover. Okay, but again, we see that, some people have this idea that, well, if I'm a Christian, I got to be perfect. I can't ever do anything wrong. Everybody in the Bible, Moses, Abraham, David, all these people that God considered faithful servants, they were still sinful men. They still did things wrong. They still made mistakes. But the difference was they were doing their best to try to serve God. And when they did make a mistake, they tried to fix it and make it right. And that's what God wants us to do. Okay, verses 27 through 31. We see the reunion of Moses and Aaron. And so Moses tells Aaron everything that's happened about the burning bush, what God said to me, and we got to go talk to Pharaoh. And, he catches him up on the whole story. And so Aaron speaks to the elders of the Hebrews, and they perform the signs, with the rod of the snake and the leprosy. They do all that. And then guess what? When they do all that, do the Israelites believe them? Yeah, just like God said they would. How about that? Right? God said they would, and they did. So we believe you have spoken to God, and he did send you. They were very thankful that God had heard their cries and that they would be delivered, and it says they bowed in reverence and they worshiped God. Good thing to do. All right, chapter 5. I know we've just got a few minutes left. Verses 1 through 3. So somehow, we're not told how, but through the providence of God, he's going to make this happen. Moses and Aaron are granted an audience with Pharaoh. It's not just like, just anybody could walk in and talk to Pharaoh, but they're granted an audience. And so they make the request, we want to go out in the wilderness, make sacrifices. Again, that was a reasonable request. Work journals from the time tell us that Pharaohs had let people do that. But this Pharaoh is not going to do that. So one of these key verses here in Exodus 5 and verse 2, and Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go." Who is your God? I don't believe in your God. He's nobody. Right? That arrogance, the hardened heart. And it might have been, if you think about it, maybe Pharaoh thought, well, the Israelites, the Hebrew people, they're my slaves. If their God is so great, how come he allows them to be enslaved? Well, he can't be that tough. That might have been something going through his head. Your God can't be that great if he lets me oppress you like I'm doing. Must mean my gods are greater than yours. So it's probably he was thinking something along those lines. But either way, he's very arrogant. He's not going to do it. So Pharaoh decides, because they had come in and they had made this request, a bunch of complainers and crybabies, and you know what that must mean? They've got way too much time on their hands. They got time to complain. So what do you think does he need to do from his point of view? Yeah, give him some more work to do. You don't have enough work to do. You got time to sit around and think about how miserable your life is? You need to be busy working. So you just got too much free time on your hands. And so he's going to drastically increase their workload. That's going to be his response to this. Let me get these thoughts out of your head. You're going to be so busy, you're not going to have time to think about. You need to go out and sacrifice out in the desert. So in verse 6, it talks about these officers that were called the officers of the children of Israel. These were Israelites who were elevated over the other slaves. They were like overseers. So they were making bricks for the Egyptians. And up to this point, they'd been supplied with straw, and then you'd mix it. And so now, Pharaoh says, from now on, tell them they got to go get their own straw. We're not going to provide it for them. In addition to making the bricks, they got to go get all the supplies. They got to gather that up themselves. Up till this point, the Egyptians had provided that. Okay. Oh, and by the way, you still have to make the same number of bricks, even though now you got to spend more time gathering the materials. So you got to make the same number of bricks essentially with less time. So you got to work harder. Okay. Now, something that's kind of interesting here, you see in verse 8, it says, and the tail of the bricks. We might go, what in the world does that mean? The tail of the bricks. This is simply the number of bricks, the count. How many bricks you make. The tail of the bricks. Okay? How many you make. So something that kind of interesting out of this, one of those things, again, word origins, we don't often really think about it. It's common terms that we use. And then if you ever stop to think, where in the world did that come from? You ever thought about why people who work in a bank are called tellers? What's a bank teller? It's a counter. Somebody counts money. So this is the tail of the bricks. The tail of the brick is counting the bricks. That's where we get our term bank tellers from. I didn't know that until a few years ago when I was studying all this. I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. And then, you just don't think about it. But that's where that comes from. Okay? So they're expected to make the same amount of bricks, and we're going to count the bricks, and you better make the same amount, but you got less time to make them because some of that time you got to gather the straw. Maybe that'll keep you busy so you don't have idle thoughts in your head. Okay? So then in verse 9, let their more work be laid upon the men, that they may labor therein, and let them not regard vain words. Okay, so Pharaoh is saying he's trying to sow the seeds of discord among the Israelites. That, you know what? Moses and Aaron, they didn't really talk to God. Those are vain words that they've been using. They're lying and you guys should ignore them. They're lying to you. Don't fall for that. They didn't talk to anybody. They're just troublemakers. And because of them, your life's gotten harder. All right, so he's trying to do that. And so when, of course, they can't meet their quota of bricks, we see in verse 14, now they're going to be severely beaten for that because they're falling short. They can't make the same number of bricks. So verses 15 through 19, then you just see the officers, they go complain to Pharaoh. Again, this is not fair. It's impossible. We can't make the same number of bricks in less time. And, you and I would probably do the same thing. We can't do it because they physically couldn't do it. So, of course, he'll have sympathy for them, right? Sure he will. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah. He doesn't care. Right? Why are you wasting my time complaining? He's got no sympathy for them. So it becomes obvious to the officers who go in and complain, they're not going to get any relief from Pharaoh. He's not going to, they can't reason with him. So if Pharaoh's goal, and I think it was, if his goal was to turn the officers and then in turn all the other slaves, if Pharaoh's goal was to turn them against Moses and Aaron, mission accomplished. Okay, because he's successfully been able to blame. Hey, you can blame those two boys for all your problems. You got more work, you're going to get beaten more. It's all because of these two bozos who claim they spoke to God, but they didn't. And you fell for it. So he's very successful. So they begin to blame Moses and Aaron for all the things that are going on. They say, all you guys have done is made things worse. And that's certainly, they had up to that point. That's what it looked like. Because they thought, apparently, that their release from Egypt was going to be immediate and painless. And like, you're not going to have to suffer. We're just going to get out of here today. Well, is that always the way God works? You've got to be patient. Trust God to do things when he's ready to do it. So then Moses goes to God. He's discouraged. Hey, everybody's turned against us. We've tried to do what you said, God, and all we've done, we've made it worse. Just like Pharaoh said. He's right. We've made it worse. Because they're thinking, God, you haven't kept your promise. Well, the truth is, God hasn't kept his promise yet. Doesn't mean he's not going to keep it. He hasn't kept it yet. Right, but they think he's not keeping it. So it probably confirmed to Moses, see, I'm not the man for the job. I can't do this. Okay? Isaiah 55, 8 and 9. Remember, God said, my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways, saith the Lord. Heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, my thoughts higher than yours. We got to trust him. It may not work the way we want it to work, but we need to trust him. God's plan was working. They needed to have faith. They needed to have patience, the same thing you and I need. God will keep his promise, and they will be delivered. Now, you and I know that, because we're looking at it hindsight, but Moses should have known it. He should have had faith in God, but he is going to keep his promise. Okay, so we're going to stop there because I know we're already over. You guys have been great tonight, very patient. I'm very sorry. So anyway, we'll pick it up with chapter 6 next time. So thank y'all for coming tonight, and I hope you have a safe drive home. Reggie, would you lead us in a prayer to close us out?